All right, in our last video, we explored the spiritual cycles and moral collapse we found in the book of Judges. Today, we're going to turn our attention to three of the best known figures from that time, Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. Now, you have a separate video on Deborah. I won't spend too much time on her here, but we will take a little bit of time on all three of these. Each of these judges is different. They're unique in personality, unique in background, unique in leadership style, but they were all used by God to deliver his people. Their stories remind us that God can work through anyone, regardless of gender, fear, or even deep personal flaws, as we see in Samson. Deborah in Judges 4 through 5 is a prophetess and military leader. She stands out for many reasons. She's both a prophetess and a judge, the only judge in the entire book who holds both roles. She leads Israel not only with wisdom, but also with courage and divine authority in a time when Israel was under oppressive rule, the rule of Jabin, king of Canaan. Deborah summoned Barak and delivered God's command to attack Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army. Barak hesitated and he said he would only go into battle if Deborah went with him. So Deborah agrees, but tells him the honor of the victory in the battle will now not go to him, but go to a woman. The prophecy was fulfilled when Jael, another woman, killed Sisera by driving a tent peg through his head while he slept. Yep, okay, it's graphic. But the theological point's clear. God uses unexpected people to accomplish his purpose, even outside the structures of traditional power. Deborah's Song, chapter 5, is one of the oldest pieces of Hebrew poetry in the Bible. It's a celebration of God's deliverance, and it's called to wake up and act. It's a testimony to the power of faithful leadership rooted in obedience and trust. All right, so you get a separate video on Deborah. So let's go ahead and pick up and look at Gideon. Gideon 6. Gideon is in Judges 6 through 8. And this is a story of fear to faith. Gideon's story is a journey from timidity to trust. We first meet him hiding in a wine press. He's threshing wheat in secret to avoid the Midianites. Now, think about this. If you're threshing wheat, the idea was you would take the wheat and all the chaff, and it would be laid out on a cloth, and you would take the winnowing fork and you would toss it into the air, and the wind would blow the chaff, the little unusable portions of the wheat away, and the wheat itself would fall back down. The grain would fall back down onto the cloth. Well, if you understand wine presses in the day, there would be depressions in the earth, so you get very little wind. So this is how fearful Gideon is. He's not even willing to be out in the open where he can get the wind to assist in the process of threshing the wheat. When Gideon is called, when God, called a mighty warrior by God, we have to remember he is full of doubt and he has to have multiple signs. The fleece test is the most famous of them to confirm God's will. Despite his hesitation, Gideon obeys. God then reduces the army. Gideon brings together 32,000 people, and God drops it down to just 300. Why? So that Israel would know that the victory came not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, by the power of the Lord. With trumpets, torches, and jars, Gideon's tiny little army then surrounds the Midianite camp and causes panic. The enemy turns on itself and Israel wins a great victory without a traditional battle. I love this story because it also involves a dream. It's not Gideon's dream, but Gideon's armor bearer and he go down into the camp. This is another one of the signs Gideon has, not the most famous, of course, being the fleece, but Gideon's armor bearer and he go down into the camp and they hear the Midianite armor discuss a dream that one of them's had. And he says, I dreamed that a loaf of barley bread rolled into the camp and it scattered the camp. And the other soldier points out, oh, this is the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. We're doomed, and fear, the seed of fear. Now you have to understand it's not planted by the torches and the lamps and these sorts of things. The seed of Gideon, the seed of fear that Gideon's army takes advantage of is is sown by this dream, because this would have spread quickly through the camp. And many people will say, what in the world is that? Why a barley loaf? Well, you got to remember Gideon was the least tribe, the least clan, the least family, and the least member of his family. So they didn't have the money. When it talks about threshing wheat at the beginning, he was threshing grain. Gideon would not have been from a family that would have been likely to have wheat. He was probably a barley farmer, the cheap, inexpensive, really looked down upon grain that bread would be made from. And so if the bread rolling into the camp of the Midianites is a barley loaf, everyone would have been making fun of Gideon. He's just an old barley farmer. So this is very clear to the Midianites that this is saying Gideon, that old barley farmer we took for granted, is going to bring destruction on us. So that seed of fear is planted by this dream, and the panic that ensues is not nearly so much a result of Gideon jumping up with horns and torches and lamps, but from God having instilled a place. Again, back to dependence on God, where we find that Gideon is this model of dependence on God. His life reveals a warning for us, though. After victory, he creates a golden ephod, and it becomes a snare to Israel, leading them back into idolatry. Idolatry. So even when we're faithful in the beginning, we need to learn to end well as an additional point for us. And this is a lesson that comes from the story of Gideon. His story shows us both sides of spiritual leadership. When it's grounded in faith, it brings victory. And when it's driven by pride or fear, it can cause us to stumble. So through all of that, God's patience and his provision is going to remain. Finally, we come to Samson. This is a story of strength and struggle in Judges 13 through 16. Before his birth, an angel announces that Samuel is going to be set apart, and he is to be set apart as a Nazarite. This is a person dedicated to God. He was not, there's several things he was not to do. He was not to drink strong wine, he was not to touch dead things, and he was not to cut his hair. In return for this Nazarite vow, it's not a natural process of the Nazarite vow, but this was a promise God made to Samson for his Nazarite vow. He obtained supernatural strength, a physical gift meant to be used for Israel's deliverance as the next judge. Samson's life, his life is marked, though, by things like impulsiveness, pride, and poor judgment. He is truthfully not the greatest example of a judge in many ways, especially his relationships. He marries a Philistine woman. He breaks his vows repeatedly. He trusts Delilah, who eventually betrays him. And after revealing that his strength comes from his uncut hair, Samson is then captured, he is blinded, and he's enslaved. But in this final act, he calls out to God one last time, and with renewed strength, he brings down the temple owned of Dagon, owned to thousands of Philistines. It kills not only them, but it kills him as well. And his story then, in the end, is not so much about his muscles. It's not so much about his natural strength. It's about grace. He was deeply, deeply flawed. We see it over and over and over again in his story. Yet he is still used by God, and he is heard. His final prayer is not one of vengeance, as we might think, but it's really a prayer of repentance and of faith. So theologically, Samson shows us that God can redeem broken people and that his power is truly made perfect in weakness. It's not just general weakness, but his power can be made perfect in weakness that actually we would consider to be failure. So these three judges here, we see a powerful picture of how God works. In Deborah, we see wisdom, faith, and courage. They're more important than position or gender. Gideon teaches us that weakness surrendered to God becomes strength. And Samson shows us a beautiful picture that even in failure, grace can prevail. These are not stories about heroes, they're stories about God's faithfulness to a faithless people. He raises up leaders that we see as heroes, not because they're perfect, but because he is merciful and he is sovereign. So let's think about this now. Which of the judges do you relate to most? How is God calling you to trust him in your own weakness or calling? And we will continue our story and our journey through the Old Testament as we go further and look next time, I believe, at the book of Ruth.